I sent the divorce letter to my cheating wife's lover's house while they were together. She was desperate when she saw the letter. I could even imagine the exact moment the envelope was ripped open, and her face, which for weeks had been covered in a false sense of security, twitched as she discovered everything was exposed. The betrayal, the contempt, the humiliation. I trusted her, I gave her my life, my dreams, our nights and future plans. All the half-light conversations, all the divided smiles, all the vows of love, all of it thrown away like crumpled paper. The idea of a divorce always seemed absurd to me, something that happened to other people. But when I realized that the woman who had once promised fidelity was leading a double life, a cold, almost calculating anger took hold of me. At first, I didn't want to believe it. The prolonged absences, the phone calls made in undertones, the lame excuses about work meetings and imaginary friends, everything was ignored by me, with an almost blind faith. But one day, in what would be just one of many routine days, I followed her. By pure instinct, a primitive intuition that hammered in my chest. She walked into a cafe I had never seen before, looked around suspiciously, and finally sat down with him. The kind of guy anyone would hate just by looking at. She kissed him, with an intimacy that I hadn't seen in our kisses in a long time. My throat went dry at that moment, my world, as I knew it, had ended there. Suddenly, it was as if all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The laughs we once shared seemed like distant echoes, memories that now tasted bitter. I became a stranger in my own home, a prisoner of a false normality, while she lived a lie so comfortable that she didn't even bother to disguise it. So, I started planning. Calmly. I watched, I waited. I didn't want confrontations, I didn't want scenes. He needed to be colder than her, more calculating than that cowardly betrayal deserved. And then, on a random Saturday, I followed her again. This time, I knew exactly where she would be. The lover's house, a modest apartment, half hidden in the city center, where they indulged in that dirty passion. And I was prepared. I prepared the letter, wrote each line with surgical precision, as if I were cutting all the ties that had once tied me to her. You are considered notified. Our marriage is over, the beginning said. The divorce was there, printed and sealed, with the coldness of a verdict. The envelope arrived exactly at the moment they were together. I can imagine the moment of delivery. A knock on the door, the postman smiling innocently as he delivered what looked like regular mail. She, distracted, opens the envelope, perhaps without even paying attention to the sender. And then, the truth drops like a bomb. She reads my name, the word divorce highlighted, and her expression falls apart. Despair. Helplessness. For the first time, she feels the force of the blow she had been plotting behind my back. I can see the whole scene playing out in my mind like a movie. And he, the lover, there next to him, as stunned as she is, realizing that he is now entangled in something much bigger than an occasional fling. I imagine the confrontation that ensued between them. How does he know? She must have whispered, trembling, her eyes wide. He was lost, not knowing what to say. It was the first time she felt the bitter taste of being exposed, of having her mask ripped off without warning. And me? I was at home, sitting on the couch, watching the clock, counting the minutes until the phone would ring, waiting for the first sign that chaos was brewing. When she called, it was already too late. His voice was unrecognizable, a mix of anger and panic. "Why did you do that?" she screamed, not understanding that there was no return, that everything I had done was a consequence of her own actions. It wasn't just the discovery of betrayal. It was the crumbling of a life built on dreams and lies. "Why did I do this?" I repeated calmly into the phone. "Because I'm tired of living in the dark. Because while you were drowning in lies, I was drowning in your falsehood. And now, my dear, you're going to feel firsthand what it's like to lose everything." And she would lose. Because she never imagined that I would have an ace up my sleeve. What she didn't know was that the house we lived in, the comfortable life we led, everything she took for granted, wasn't hers. The house was an inheritance, mine and mine alone. I never registered her name as co-owner. And now, watching everything fall apart around her, she would begin to realize that the cruelest betrayal would not be hers, but mine. The story of how everything got to this point, the plot of betrayal, of a destroyed love, and of the cold revenge of someone who had all the pieces in hand from the beginning. Now, she was cornered, caught in her own trap. And what would come next? Well, no one could have predicted that. Because the truth is, when betrayal is discovered, it's not just love that ends, it's the very notion of who we are. And for her, discovering that everything around her was fragile, like glass about to break, will be just the beginning of the end. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is not tolerated and will never be supported. The stories you will hear are fictional, but their moral is clear: betrayal destroys lives, corrodes loves and leaves deep scars. Get ready, because the story that comes next is intense, full of twists and turns, and will show how a single decision can end everything. Now, sit back and enjoy the story. You're about to hear something shocking. David had always been a focused man. Owner of a small technology company, he had built his career with effort and passion, always believing that hard work would bring him and his wife, Helena, the life they deserved. Married for 8 years, they lived in a spacious house in an elegant neighborhood, the result of a family heirloom that David maintained with a certain pride, as if that property was a symbol of his stability and success. Their routine was like that of any upper-middle-class couple: social engagements, dinners with friends, and occasional trips to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. But it was in the comfort of their home, with large glass windows overlooking a well-kept garden, that David and Helena liked to spend their best moments. There was a naturalness to the way the light filtered through the curtains in the mornings, illuminating the breakfast table where they often sat together to discuss the day ahead. Life seemed simple, functional. Perfect, at least in David's eyes. Helena, an elegant woman, had always been the type of person who enchanted everyone around her. He had an air of lightness, an easy smile and an aura that seemed to light up any room he entered. She worked as an architect at a famous firm, and her dynamic and vivacious personality suited her profession. Helena loved attending social events, art galleries, cocktails with friends and events involving architecture and design. In everyone's eyes, she was the perfect wife. Companion at David's company parties, involved in decisions about the home and passionate about her work. It was easy for David to be proud of her, to see her as the life partner he always wanted. The kind of woman he always dreamed of building a family with. Even if, little by little, conversations at the dinner table became shorter, and eyes took longer to meet. Even if he sometimes felt a slight disconnect, as if Helena's world was always one step ahead, always a little distant. Their marriage, like any other, had its ups and downs. Moments of deep affection, like when Helena supported David in his riskiest projects, and moments of heavy silence, when discussions about finances or time dedicated to work were inevitable. But even in those moments, David always believed they had a connection strong enough to overcome any difficulty. David has always had a pragmatic view of love. For him, love meant caring, protecting and, above all, being loyal. He made a point of being present at important moments, of being the support Helena needed when her work became stressful or when her professional plans didn't seem to go as expected. Maybe that was why, in a way, he had become complacent in certain aspects of his life. I believe that maintaining a stable routine, being a solid presence and offering emotional and financial security were what really mattered in a relationship. And, until then, he believed that Helena shared this same vision. But Helena was a woman of intense emotions. Someone who craved adventure, novelty, and a certain type of passion that perhaps the routine of a stable marriage couldn't fully offer. As the years passed, she began to feel suffocated by the walls of that house, no matter how beautiful and elegant it was, and by a life that, although comfortable, seemed to lose its luster. She tried not to let this restlessness show, she remained active in social events, she smiled at everyone, but there was something growing in her chest, something that not even she could explain. From time to time, David noticed that Helena seemed distracted, lost in thought. But he always credited it to her job, which had spikes in stress, tight deadlines and difficult clients. When I questioned her, she always made quick excuses, saying that everything was fine, that it was just accumulated tiredness, or the weight of work responsibilities. And David, who had never had any reason to distrust her, accepted these answers as true. Weekends used to be the time when the couple reconnected. David made sure to prepare breakfast, taking trays full of fresh fruit and juice to bed, where they spent time together talking about the week. Helena always seemed grateful, although her expression was different from the former lightness of years ago. She was smiling, yes, but her eyes were more introspective, as if there was an untold story behind that look. Despite this, friends saw them as an admirable couple. "You are an example of love," said many. But only Helena knew about the doubts that pulsed in her chest. The uncertainties that haunted her night after night, as she questioned whether the life she was leading was really the life she wanted. A part of her wanted to completely surrender to that comfortable and safe routine, while another part, which she herself could barely admit, longed for something more, something undefined. During the week, David spent hours at his company, dedicated to solving problems and improving his business. Occasionally, he would call Helena to check on her day or to arrange dinner at a sophisticated restaurant. And most of the time, she seemed content with these calls, as if they were a reminder that he was there, even when he was physically absent. But it was on Friday nights, when David arrived later due to work commitments, that Helena showed different behavior. She said she was tired, went to bed early, or locked herself in the office, claiming to be reviewing projects for work. He always believed that. There was never a reason to be suspicious, as she was always a dedicated wife, someone who loved her profession and who always valued transparency. There was something, however, that no one noticed, the invisible distance that grew between them. Little things that previously went unnoticed, but now, in retrospect, seemed like signs of something bigger. The way Helena sometimes ignored David's calls, saying she was too busy, or the way she looked away when he surprised her with sudden affection. And David, too busy with his own routine, ignored these signs. He trusted his wife, he believed that all those changes were just part of the growth and maturation of a long relationship. Still, even without knowing why, he began to question himself. Questioning whether the life he was leading was really the life they both wanted. And even if these doubts arose in moments of silence, he always pushed them away, thinking that they were just daydreams of a tired mind, worn down by the weight of daily responsibilities. David had no idea what was coming. He didn't know that while he believed he was building a solid foundation, there were invisible cracks forming, threatening to tear down everything he believed to be unshakable. And Helena. Helena also didn't know how far she was willing to go to find what was missing in her life. What they both couldn't imagine was that, at that moment, they were on a tightrope, about to lose their balance. A fall that would forever change the life they knew. Autumn arrived with its icy air, bringing with it a feeling of change. David felt something was different. He tried to ignore it, focus on work, on projects, on the numbers that filled his spreadsheets. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Helena's distant look, her evasive smiles, as if she was always thinking far away, flying to a place he couldn't reach. This started to bother him. It became a constant weight, something he carried, even if he didn't want to. One night, David came home earlier than usual. The office was closed due to unexpected maintenance, and he decided to surprise Helena. He bought flowers, her favorite perfume, and planned an impromptu dinner. He liked these simple gestures, little moments of affection that reaffirmed who they were. When he walked in the door, the smell of fresh food wasn't there, and the house felt empty, as if he'd returned to a place that no longer belonged to him. He called for Helena, but only the echo of his own voice responded. Her phone was off. He tried to push away any negative thoughts, thinking that maybe she was with friends, or even at a last-minute work meeting. Deep down, he knew something was wrong. But how could he have predicted what he was about to discover? The days that followed were worse. Helena seemed even more absent, her excuses increasingly lame. A last-minute meeting. I need to see a client at the office. She avoided David's eyes, and he, caught between distrust and the desire to believe that everything was fine, just nodded, pretending to believe all the excuses. David tried to convince himself that it was just his thoughts betraying him, that Helena would never be able to deceive him like that. But at the same time, he felt something breaking, slowly and painfully, inside him. One day, while at work, David received an anonymous message. A photo of Helena in a restaurant, sitting next to a man he didn't know. She was smiling, a smile that wasn't meant for him. David stared at the image for long minutes, unable to believe what he saw. There was something in the way she looked at the man, something he hadn't seen in years in his own marriage. Anger and jealousy took over him. Without thinking twice, he called Helena. She answered in her usual soft voice, pretending to be normal, but there was something different, the way she spoke quickly, as if she was rushing to hang up. David asked where she was, and Helena, without hesitation, said she was in a meeting with a client, reviewing plans for an important project. David knew she was lying. The silence that followed was suffocating, and he only replied, "Okay, we'll talk later." He hung up the phone, unable to continue the conversation without showing his fury. It was too late to continue pretending that something wasn't wrong. He decided not to confront her directly, not yet. I needed proof, I needed to make sure I wasn't imagining things. He began to observe Helena closely, paying attention to every detail that he previously ignored. The perfume she only used on special occasions became a daily perfume. The mysterious smiles as he checked his cell phone. Frequent visits to the office after hours. One night, when Helena said she would need to work late, David decided to follow her. Anguish and curiosity mixed, forming a knot in his stomach. He saw her leave the house, wearing a dress he hadn't seen in a while, one she used to wear in the early years of their marriage. He followed his car at a safe distance, his sweaty hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Each traffic light seemed to last forever, each turn was like entering a maze that he didn't know if he could get out of. Helena stopped in front of an apartment building. He recognized the place at once. It was the neighborhood where she used to work before they got married, a place he always associated with their dating days, when their passion was young and intense. Now, however, that scenario seemed like a betrayal scenario. She got out of the car, looked around to make sure she wasn't being followed, and entered the building. David parked across the street, watching as she disappeared through the glass doors. For a moment, David wanted to walk in behind her, confront her right there. But the fear of hearing the truth, of seeing with his own eyes what he already knew, paralyzed him. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, his breathing heavy. Minutes later, a man came down to open the door for Helena. A tall, well-dressed man, who welcomed her with an intimate hug, like someone hugging someone they love. She smiled at him, a smile full of desire, and went up to the apartment hand in hand with this stranger. David felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. His stomach dropped, and he had to force himself not to get out of the car and face them both at that moment. But he knew it wasn't the time. Not yet. As he felt the bitter taste of betrayal taking over his mouth, he understood that he now needed to act coolly and calmly. It wasn't just marriage that was at stake, it was the life he knew, the stability, the future he had imagined. Back in the car, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I knew that betrayal would mark the end of something. But what Helena would never imagine was that that night would be just the beginning of a storm that was about to come. A storm she couldn't control. David woke up that morning with the feeling that something was about to happen. He had spent the night awake, reliving the scene of Helena entering her lover's apartment. Every detail, every movement, every smile of her next to that man seemed recorded in her mind like an open wound that wouldn't heal. He knew he couldn't continue living in that anguish, pretending that everything was fine. Helena's betrayal had broken something inside him, something that could never be fixed. During breakfast, the silence between them was suffocating. Helena was distracted, as always, looking at her cell phone. David watched her every move, every time she avoided his eyes. It was as if she was present physically, but somewhere else mentally. David felt his chest tighten, the bitter taste of betrayal burning his throat. But he knew this was not the time to confront her. Not yet. He needed to have everything planned out, he needed something stronger, something that would put everything into perspective, that would make her realize the mistake she had made. In the days that followed, David acted calmly, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to act. He knew that Helena had no idea that he knew about the betrayal, so, for her, he continued to be the attentive and dedicated husband he had always been. But David was now a different person. He put aside the desire to rescue that marriage, to save the love between them. All he wanted was justice, revenge, and to see Helena pay for everything. At the end of that week, when Helena left to meet a friend in a cafe in the city, David followed the plan he had been preparing coldly. He called his lawyer and asked for all the divorce documents to be finalized. In a tone of voice that left no room for doubt, he asked that the divorce letter be sent directly to his lover's address. David knew that the impact of Helena receiving the letter there, in that place where she thought she was safe, would be devastating. He didn't just want to end the marriage, I wanted to destroy the mask of security she had built for herself. He spent the weekend in silence, waiting for the moment. And finally, the day arrived. Helena was once again getting ready to go out, and David watched from the bedroom door, pretending that he was distracted by some newspaper. "I'm going to meet my friend, it'll take me a while," said Helena, throwing her hair back and smiling in a casual way. David nodded, without saying a word. But inside, he was counting the minutes for her to discover the truth. Helena left, and David remained motionless in the room, looking at the clock, his heart pounding. He knew the divorce letter was about to be delivered. I knew that, in a matter of hours, the life they knew would shatter. And he was prepared for it. It was early in the evening that Helena returned home. She walked through the door almost desperately, her face pale, her eyes wide and red as if she had been crying for hours. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky, barely able to support herself. David looked at her calmly, getting up from the sofa, with a mix of satisfaction and pain in his eyes. "Yes, Helena, we need to talk," he replied. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Helena was holding the divorce letter, the envelope already crumpled by her shaking hands. Did you send this, to him?" she asked, trying to maintain control but failing miserably. David nodded, a slight sneer on his lips. "I thought this would be the best place for you to receive this news. After all, you were exactly where you wanted to be, right?" Helena choked on the words, tears streaming down her face. "David, I can explain," she began, trying to get closer, but he took a step back, raising his hand to stop her from getting closer. "Explain what, Helena?" "That while I was here, working, believing in us, you were there, with another man. That you decided to throw away 8 years of our marriage like it was nothing." She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't. She knew that any words she said now would be empty, insignificant compared to the pain she had caused. So David continued. "Do you know what's worst about all this? It wasn't just the betrayal, Helena. It wasn't just the fact that you betrayed me. It was his contempt, his cowardice. You thought I would never find out. You thought I would continue being the fool I always was, while you had fun behind my back. But, you see, the truth has a cruel way of coming out, doesn't it?" Helena sobbed, her hands covering her face, trying to hold back the tears. "David, please. I never wanted to hurt you. She couldn't finish the sentence, because she knew any excuse would be empty. "I knew what she did was unforgivable." David looked at her with contempt. "You never wanted to hurt me. Are you seriously saying this now? After everything, you still try to play the victim? He took a deep breath, as if controlling the urge to burst into screams. Do you think I didn't love you? That I didn't do everything for you? Do you think I didn't give you everything I could? That question echoed through the silence of the room, and Helena just shook her head, trying to find words that weren't coming. David then laughed bitterly, a sound that sounded more like pain than humor. You know, Helena, I didn't want us to end up like this. I really didn't want to. But after everything that happened, I realized that there is no way to continue. Our marriage is over. And you know what's most ironic? David paused, looking directly into Helena's eyes, who was standing still, her body shaking, trying to absorb every word. The house where we live, this home that you thought was yours. It was never yours, Helena. It never will be. I never put your name as co-owner. This house has always been mine. It was an inheritance, and I always knew that if something went wrong, I would at least have that. So when you walk out that door, there's nothing to go back to. The impact of those words made Helena collapse. She fell to her knees on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, the reality of her actions finally becoming unbearable. What she thought was a temporary fling, a way to escape the monotony, had become the end of everything she knew. Now, not only would she lose her husband, but also her home, her security, the life she had. Please, David, don't leave me with nothing, not like this, she begged, her voice broken by sobs. But David remained firm. You made your choice, Helena. And now you will have to face the consequences. What did you think? That he could continue this farce forever? That I would never find out? She shook her head frantically, as if she couldn't process the extent of her situation. I just wanted. I don't know what I wanted, Helena stammered, but David no longer wanted to hear it. The point, Helena, is that now it no longer matters what you wanted. Everything you destroyed, all the dreams, the confidence. That won't come back. And honestly, I don't care anymore. Get your things and get out of here. You no longer have a place in this house, in my life. Helena got up with difficulty, her eyes swollen, her face marked by tears. The last thing she expected was to lose everything at once. Now, without ground, without hope, she walked to her room, packing some clothes in her suitcase, like someone who is losing their identity. She looked at the house one last time, a house she believed to be hers, but which now seemed colder and more distant than ever. And as the door closed behind her, David remained silent, feeling a mixture of relief and emptiness. He knew that decision would change his life forever. And somehow, he was ready for what came next. The door closed, and the silence that filled the house was unlike any David had ever experienced. It was a deep silence, an almost palpable emptiness, as if all the memories and sounds of those years together had been sucked out of there along with Helena. He sat on the sofa in the living room, his eyes lost on the window, his mind a mess of thoughts and emotions. There was no satisfaction, no joy for what he had done. It was a feeling of loss, of something that would never be recovered. But at the same time, a cruel calm, as if he had finally put everything in place. The next few days were like walking through a thick fog. David took care of all the legal procedures, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. His routine became mechanical, waking up, working, dealing with the lawyer, returning home and hoping that time would somehow bring peace. But inevitably, every room in that house brought back memories. The nights of conversation in the dim light in the kitchen, the lazy Sunday mornings in the bedroom, the laughter they shared in the garden. And at the same time, he knew that it had all turned into a lie. Every smile of hers, every "I love you" whispered as she betrayed him. And the dilemma that now took over David was this: how to move forward after everything. How do you reconnect with your own identity when everything you knew had been taken apart, piece by piece? He found himself in moments of anger, taking out his frustration on small objects, as if breaking a glass or kicking a chair could somehow alleviate the pain he felt. But then, right after the stress passed, all that was left was emptiness. The emotional exhaustion that made him want to disappear completely. Helena, on the other hand, was lost. From the moment he left the house he once called home, he wandered aimlessly. She felt like a stranger in her own city, in a place that had always been her refuge. For days, she stayed at a friend's house, until she found the courage to talk to her lover. She didn't know what to expect, but she hoped to find support, perhaps comfort. However, when she sought him out, he received her coldly, distantly. "I didn't know it would end like this, Helena." "That's not what we agreed on," he said, his voice hard. It was as if, suddenly, the adventure they shared had lost all its luster, all its excitement. Without the adrenaline of the forbidden, everything seemed dull, empty. He didn't want to be the reason a marriage broke up. "I wasn't willing to bear the weight of that guilt." Helena tried to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. She herself didn't know what she wanted. She tried to cling to him like a life raft, but realized there was no future. The forbidden passion they shared was an illusion, a temporary escape from a life she believed to be monotonous. Now, however, the only thing left was regret. The life she had, the comfort and stability that, for so long, seemed to suffocate her, now seemed so distant and unattainable. She lost her husband, her house, and now, also, her lover. Helena was alone. Meanwhile, David began trying to reconnect with his old life. He found support in close friends, who only then found out about what had happened. Everyone was shocked. No one imagined that Helena could cheat, no one suspected anything. What bothered him most, however, were the words of comfort, the well-intentioned advice. "You'll get through this, David. It's better this way, at least now you know who she really is." But none of that helped. The words were like bandages for a wound too deep to heal so easily. There was one night, however, when something changed. As he relived everything he had been through, the pain, the anger, the loss, David found himself faced with a decision. He realized that he could spend the rest of his life trapped in that betrayal, mulling over every detail, drowning in resentment, or he could choose to free himself. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be immediate. But he needed a way to move forward, to find who he was before all the chaos. It was then that he decided to look for Helena, one last time. Not to confront her, not to forgive her, but to end it once and for all. They met in a discreet cafe, far from the one they usually frequented together. When she saw him, he looked like a shadow of his former self. Deep dark circles, hair tied up in any way, restless hands holding a cup of coffee. She didn't know what to expect from that meeting, and guilt consumed her like fire. David sat down opposite him, took a deep breath and began to speak. "Helena, I'm not here to scream or apologize. I'm not here to resolve what has already been destroyed. I just want to say, this is over. In truth, I will move on, one way or another. And I hope you find a way too." She looked up at him in surprise. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something else, that there was room for reconciliation. But what he found was the raw and definitive truth. "I know you made a mistake, Helena. But now you have to live with it. And me too. The only thing I wanted to say is that, despite everything, I hope that one day you find peace. Because I'm going to find mine." His words were not anger, but determination. She tried to respond, but her voice broke. All he could do was nod, tears forming in his eyes, not knowing how to react. When David got up to leave, she felt the weight of everything she had lost. And he realized that, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he sought explanations, nothing would change the fact that his mistake had led to the end of everything they had built. David left the cafe with a strange feeling of relief and sadness. A mix of freedom and mourning for what I had lost. But he knew this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that, perhaps, it was possible to start over. Time passed and the lives of David and Helena followed paths that, once intertwined, now seemed like divergent and lonely roads. David dove headfirst into work, looking to reinvent himself. There was something liberating about no longer carrying the weight of a broken marriage, constant betrayal. He began spending more time with friends, traveling, and slowly rediscovering pleasures he hadn't felt in years. But there was something he carried, even if he wanted to leave it behind, a shadow of distrust. Every new relationship he tried to start was interrupted by the fear that everything could happen again, that someone could betray him again. But David had also transformed into something stronger. The pain had shaped him, stripped him of the naivety he once had, but it had made him more determined. He started attending support groups, connecting with people who had gone through similar experiences, and this helped him to overcome, to see that there was more to life than that betrayal. He learned to trust, slowly, and found in himself an ability to move forward that he didn't realize he had. He began to relate again, albeit cautiously, taking small steps towards a new chapter. One afternoon, months after the divorce, he returned to the house he had once shared with Helena. She was now for sale, and he knew that going in there, for the last time, would be necessary to close that chapter of his life once and for all. Each room seemed different, empty, as if time had erased all the memories that were once recorded there. Yet as he passed the kitchen, where so many happy mornings had been shared, he felt a pang of sadness, but this time, a light sadness, not the crushing weight that had accompanied him in the past. He allowed himself to cry, one last time, as a symbolic farewell to the man he had been. Then he locked the door and left, sure he was ready to start again. Meanwhile, Helena faced her own battles. After losing everything, her house, her marriage, her lover, she found herself aimless, without ground. Friends who previously applauded her for her joy and spontaneity began to look at her with disdain, many judging her actions, others moving away. She began to realize that her mistake had not just been betraying David, but betraying herself. For months, Helena tried to pick up the pieces of her life. He found a small apartment to live in, and his routine became an incessant search to reconnect with the person he once was. She sought therapy, trying to understand the reasons that led her to make decisions that ruined her own life. One day, during a therapy session, Helena admitted to herself something she had never said out loud: she was not happy. Never had been, really. Betrayal was just a desperate escape from a life she didn't know how to fix. The therapist then asked her what she wanted to do to change. And that simple question became a spark for Helena. For the first time, she realized she needed to stop looking back and start building something new. Without the luxuries she once had, Helena once again dedicated herself to her career as an architect, but this time with a different purpose. He began volunteering in community projects, helping families find creative solutions for affordable housing. She found some solace in knowing that at least she was now trying to do something meaningful. But she knew that the weight of what she had done would never completely disappear. And accepted it, as part of who she became. One day, while walking through the city center, Helena and David crossed paths by chance. It was a brief moment, an exchange of looks that carried all the unspoken words, all the suffering, the guilt and the memories. They looked at each other for a few seconds, as if trying to recognize the person they once loved in the stranger in front of them. David gave a slight nod, a gesture that mixed understanding and farewell. Helena, in turn, smiled, a sad but genuine smile, as if she finally understood that that chapter was, in fact, closed. They went their separate ways without saying a word. And that's how their lives continued, parallel, but never crossing paths again. David found a new love, someone he met unexpectedly on a trip. And although it took him a while to trust, he allowed himself to feel again. Little by little, he realized that he was ready to start over, with all the scars, but also with a renewed desire to live and be happy. He sold his old house and bought a modern loft, without the baggage of the past, where he started to build new memories. Helena, on the other hand, focused on her own growth. Little by little, she forgave herself for what she did, understanding that it was a mistake she could never fix, but that it didn't need to define who she would be forever. She found a new passion in helping others, and it brought her a peace she had never felt before. The past cannot be erased, and mistakes left deep marks on both of them. But life went on, and each of them, in one way or another, found their own path. A path full of imperfections, scars and regrets, but also of hope and new beginnings. And this is how this story of betrayal, loss and, above all, overcoming ends. Because, in the end, no matter how much the past hurts us, there is always a chance to start over. If you've made it this far, leave what you thought of the story in the comments and share your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Remembering that, around here, we do not support any type of betrayal. We believe that respect and loyalty are the basis of any relationship. Until next time.